The tariff changes that we're proposing for the rate hearing at the April board meeting are listed on this page, starting with the JEA Solar Smart tariff, and we'll describe this in a little more detail in the coming pages. It is essentially a new product that allows customers to participate in solar. We are proposing administrative changes to the tariff. The first is to add a distributed generation application fee for solar installations that are 50 kilowatts and larger. Those are very large solar installations. They're 8 times larger than the average residential installation, and that fee is meant to recapture the significant amount of engineering time involved in the interconnection of a system that's that large to our system. We are proposing a modification to the economic development program to allow companies that take advantage of the economic development program to also participate in the Solar Smart program. So if they want to locate here, take advantage of EDP, but also get their energy, or at least a portion of their energy from solar, they would be able to do that under that program. And we're proposing several streetlight changes, adding 2 decorative streetlight tariffs, 2 standard streetlight tariffs, and they're primarily related to the expansion of LED lighting in our service territory. The JEA Solar Smart program that's proposed for consideration next month does allow customers for whom rooftop solar isn't a good option to participate in solar. What it essentially does is customers can elect up to 100% of their solar to come from this JEA Solar Smart program. And it's a good alternative for those customers who, for example, live in multifamily housing complexes that don't have their own roof, or who have a lot of tree cover on their properties, for whom rooftop solar would not be a good option. But allows those customers to go green with JEA by purchasing those solar kilowatt hours. The size of the program is actually limited to the output that we receive from those utility scale solar installations. And we've replaced the fuel component of the customer's bill with the solar component at cost. So in other words, we'll charge our customers what it costs us to actually buy that solar energy. Solar rate programs are certainly not new in the utility space, and this is just a snapshot of some of the utilities around the country that offer a solar rate program that's optional to their customers, to allow customers to participate in solar through their utility. Here's a snapshot of what a bill would look like under the JEA Solar Smart program. This is a typical customer at 1,000 kilowatt hours per month. And in this example, this customer has opted to receive 50% of their power from solar resources under the JEA Solar Smart program. So as you see, if you look to the 4th line on this bill, the fuel charge is credited, half of the fuel charge is credited under the JEA Solar Smart bill, and it's replaced with the Solar Smart program fee that's added for the 50% of power that's elected from solar. The net impact on a customer's bill is about $20 a month for this 50% of their power coming from solar at 1,000 kilowatt hours. Any questions on any of the tariff proposals before I change the page to go to net metering? Okay, the next section, it dives down into the net metering policy recommendations that are proposed for the board. And I'll emphasize these are policy changes. There's a reference to the net metering policy in the tariff, but changes to the policy itself require board action only, so that would be outside of the public hearing and for the April board meeting. The first page in this section describes an overview of net metering, and this page is one that is probably familiar to you at this point, so I'll go through it very quickly. Essentially, the net metering process takes energy from the sun, converts it to electricity through solar panels on a customer's roof. The first place that that electricity goes is self-supply. So it supplies the usage of that home, or the needs of that home in terms of electricity. To the extent the amount of electricity produced by those panels exceeds the home's needs at any point in time, that electricity is then put back on the JEA grid. That arrow, that's the upper arrow that's got the orange box around it, I'll note is the only portion of this whole diagram that has a policy change that's being considered associated with it. So we're really focusing on that one arrow, just that one piece of net metering for this discussion. If the solar panels are not producing enough for the homeowner's needs exceed what's produced by the solar panels because it's dark or for whatever reason, the homeowner would then take electricity from the grid. And we'll spend a little bit of time about that on that box when we talk about pricing electricity in the 21st century later on the agenda. Under the current net metering policy, the customer bill credit for solar is the same as the retail rate. that the customer pays for utility consumption. It essentially treats the grid as a free battery that provides storage for solar to distributed generation customers. But it's important to remember that JEA's retail rate also includes the costs of generation capacity, distribution, transmission, components of the grid that customer still uses in the ways that we've just talked about. It's a structure that was put in place 25 years ago, and it was put in place largely because that's what metering technology could do at the time. It was a metering capability construct, and technology has really advanced, both in terms of solar technology, but also the metering technology itself. And that advancement really allows us to now more appropriately capture the cost of providing services to distributed generation customers. So the policy changes that we're going to talk about, or the recommendations we're going to talk about, are really recognizing the advancement in the solar industry, coupled with our need to align the credit for excess solar against newer market conditions for the product. And I'll skip that page because I think we've largely talked about it. This page will provide a summary of where we're starting in terms of net metering. The first place that we went to as a starting point in terms of policy changes to construct a policy that's the fairest and most transparent policy for all of our customers. And then ultimately we'll get to where we ended up after the incorporation of stakeholder feedback. Under today's structure, we pay a retail rate for solar energy that's put back on the grid. We're on the second line of this chart here. It's worth noting that 5 years ago, our retail rate was 2 cents higher than it is today. So it's a pretty significant decline in electricity rates. And the reason I point that out is in part because I don't miss an opportunity to point out rate decreases, but in part because to illustrate that the value that's being paid for solar really it isn't tied to solar value. It's tied to, in this case, the retail rate of the utility, and the retail rate for every utility across the country is different. So under net metering, which is a common construct, there's an assignment of value that's tied to retail rates, but they're all really different. It really has nothing to do with the solar itself. Our Tier 3 customers, which for shorthand here are labeled commercial, are being paid avoided costs today. So they're being paid significantly less for the same commodity that's being put back on the grid. And we do have a capacity limit under today's net metering policy of 10 megawatts. So as we thought about this construct and thought about the fairest way for us to approach modifying the policy recommendations for the benefit of our customers, where we started was what we think of as a traditional utility model, but it's really staying inside of the economic box of JEA and looking at the real dollar value of each of these components. So what we initially proposed was crediting all solar at avoided cost. And from a math and from an economics perspective, when we receive solar energy from a distributed generation customer, we're having to turn down another source of energy. And so by tying it to avoided cost, we're perfectly capturing the cost of what we're turning down when we're receiving that power from solar. We also proposed a demand charge, a fixed component of the bill to recognize the grid costs that distributed energy solar customers are incurring of anywhere between $16 and $38 a month. We had considered requiring inverters, which essentially gives the utility control over how much electricity is being put back on the grid so that we can control for power quality and reliability issues on the utility side. We did not propose expanding the capacity limit, and we looked at a relatively fast implementation at 60 days. Based on feedback that we got from stakeholders and based on conversations, many conversations with the community, this recommendation evolved into what we talked to the board about in February. And it evolved to some modifications to the starting point, and I'll come back in just a minute to why some of these boxes are yellow. What we proposed in February was that we recognize that we have leaders in our community that have made investments in rooftop solar. We've got just over 500 customers that have solar on their rooftops and made that investment decision under the net metering construct. So the proposal included grandfathering those customers under current net metering rules. We proposed paying a market rate for solar, both for the Tier 1 and 2 smaller installations and for the Tier 3 larger installations. Again, recognizing we're out there in the market contracting for solar now. We're putting PPAs in place. We know what the market price is of those PPAs, which includes all the attributes of solar. And so from a fairness perspective, it seemed the fairest thing for us to recommend was to pay the same amount for the same commodity to all customers that were providing it to the JEA system. We didn't recommend a demand charge at this time, and not unless it becomes the default rate for all customers. We didn't recommend a specific inverter requirement, and instead took a step back to look at the impact on reliability and power quality in the JEA system, and to give the market a chance to mature a little further on the inverter requirements. We doubled the capacity limit in the policy to 20 megawatts from the existing 10 megawatts. And the implementation date was proposed to be relatively quickly after the board's approval of the recommendations. The boxes that are in yellow on this page, what I'd like to do is propose some items for the board to consider in terms of potential choices. The first relates to grandfathering. We felt the fairest thing to do for customers that had made investment decisions based on a current set of rules was to grandfather those customers. What we've heard in feedback from stakeholders is that there is a preference among some stakeholder groups for us to instead essentially step into the new credit amount for solar. And either choice would be a way for a utility to bring along customers that had made investment decisions prior to a rule change. We've seen both done by utilities, and we've seen both done, again, to recognize customers that were already there before the policy change was made. What this phase-in would look like is for all customers now, we wouldn't grandfather anybody, we treat everybody the same way. But for all customers, we could go from the 10 cents that's being credited today down to 9 for next year, 8 the following year, and then ultimately 7.5 cents in 2019. From an economic perspective to the rest of the non-solar JEA customers, they're essentially economically indifferent. There's not a material difference in cost between those two options. But that was offered by some of our stakeholder conversations as a potential alternative for the board to consider. The second alternative to consider relates to the capacity limit, which is the second yellow box that's on this page. JEA had proposed doubling the capacity limit to 20 megawatts and having that as a hard limit in the policy. That's what you'd see in the draft policy that was shared with the board in February. The purpose of setting the limit at 20 megawatts was, first of all, to double it, to give us plenty of room for additional solar adoption within our service territory, but to have a very clear stopping point so that we would have the opportunity to analyze power quality and reliability issues that result from that much solar capacity coming on the grid. We got feedback from some of the stakeholders that we talked to that there wasn't a clear reason to limit it to 20 megawatts, and so one thing the board might consider is giving us instead a pause point in the language to do that power quality and reliability analysis, but then have another step in the process to come back to the board, and so perhaps make it not as firm a limit from a policy perspective. And the third yellow box there is around implementation. We had recommended an implementation about 30 days after final approval by the board. But what we have seen in the interim is some slowdown in the utility scale solar installations that are going in. And this is all really a solar strategy. It's all a comprehensive program, and it all kind of works together. And so because of that slowdown, because the utility scale solar installations are delayed by about 6 months, one of the things the board might consider is also delaying implementation of these policy changes by about the same amount of time. So rather than it being 30 days after the board meeting, it could instead be December 31st, so the changes would take effect on January 1st. So I'll pause there and just invite feedback and discussion on those potential changes.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, Melissa. Can you tell me one more time what the option was for the grandfather in your first yellow box?
We received feedback that it would be preferable to step into these rate changes rather than having them take effect on a date certain. So the example of a utility or a jurisdiction that's done this is Nevada. Nevada made some very, very significant changes. In fact, pretty different changes than we're talking about here, but they made some very significant changes. And they had initially implemented those on a date certain, and because of feedback in the state of Nevada, they came back and actually rolled them out over a number of years. That was a way to ease in existing customers into a very new and different rate structure, and it's been used elsewhere too. It's another alternative to bring existing customers who have already made those investments along to a new set of rules.
I'm sorry, I wasn't specific. Would the graduation be for new customers as well?
It treat all customers exactly the same.
Okay, thank you.
And what were the steps of graduate, what were the terms of getting to the right now? You would start at what and into what?
We'd start today, we're at 10 cents. So
Right.
the first change would be to go to 9 cents for a year, then to 8 cents for a year, then to 7.5 cents.
So it would take 3 years to get to 3.
So it would be based on a time, not penetration of solar use.
That's correct.
And with respect to the 20 megawatt capacity limit, you said there could be a pause point. Again, would that pause point be based on a time or based on a certain penetration of solar?
Our recommendation is it's based on penetration, because the pause point really is to look at system reliability issues
And what would that penetration
at 20 megawatts.
Oh, when it's, but I thought, oh, this is 20 megawatts for all users, not.
Correct.
Understood.
That penetration includes what JEA.
Correct.
It does?
It does not.
Does not, just what's used in the process.
Correct.
Now, the grandfather decision, I think, your original intent was to grandfather in those for 500 rooftop customers today. But they installed and invested in that system with the understanding they would be able to recoup a saving at that instant. So you're talking about 500 customers who we're then going to change the policy after they make that decision. I just have a little heartburn. I guess, do you know how old some of these units are, how new some of them
We can certainly provide that data, and I'll just note that the grandfathering remains the recommendation in the box.
But just going back to the 20 megawatts, what does that mean from a penetration standpoint? That means 500 solar homes today turns into 2,000 homes? What is, can you define what 20 megawatts?
From memory, it's about 7 times what we have today.
So about 3,500. So it's a significant penetration
Yes.
from where we are today.
Yeah, we have plenty of room. We have a 10 megawatt limit today, and we have plenty of room under the 10 megawatt limit. But the purpose of doubling it was to send a signal that we are open for business when it comes to solar.
What's been the rate of growth? 500 homes a year?
Again, this is going from memory, but I think it's been approximately doubling every year.
To get to the 500 per.
If I can give a little clarity on the 10 megawatts. The 10 megawatts, it's really, the pause button now would be for system reliability. And it's the time to assess the system reliability depending upon where the installations occur. We get a very different impact on the system if we have a circuit with 20 individuals on it and 15 of those have solar versus if we have 20 circuits and 15, one on each circuit for those 20. And it has an impact on power quality and reliability. We just want to be sure that we can hit the pause button in an articulated policy for some period of time to do a review. It might be 3 to 6 months. And then if we conclude that we need to more formally come back with an adjustment for power quality or reliability. If we get to 7.5 cents, we become completely agnostic to the amount here in terms of the economics, whether it's 10, 20, 30, 50 megawatts.
But at the last meeting, if I remember correctly, the 7.5 cents was where we were going to start. But the recommendation was every year that number could change based on what the PPA would, or what the market would be selling solar at. So in a if you step into this, again, you really, what you lose, or this is where we're going, is everybody that buys a solar unit today really has a tough time calculating their break even because you
visible, right?
But it automatically would, the rate would automatically be adjusted, right? The way the proposal was written, I think the rate was gonna be automatically adjusted as the retail rate to purchase solar changed.
But anybody buying solar today wouldn't have any certainty as to what rates might be a year or 2 years from now.
Today they do, because we're fixed at.
Yeah, but we can
Right,
change it.
Exactly, right.
But it's similar to it, the existing customer without solar, they make the decision today based on the size of their home and other attributes.
Yeah, for clarity, I wanted to,
Yeah.
that part of the proposal has not, it wasn't listed here, I was trying to find out whether or not that still exists as part of the proposal or not, so the proposal would still have the 7.5 cents really tied to, on the annual basis.
Annual adjustment, yes.
Exactly.
So, back to Warren's question and point, nobody has received a guaranteed rate forever because they have solar on the rooftop. I mean, that's not where we start.
We started with retail.
We have a fixed start.
Already they've got the 2
I mean,
cents.
to your point, it was gonna fluctuate anyway, it wasn't gonna stay the same. But now what we're saying is we're not gonna be any difference in the cost.
The cost of those grandfathered in, I thought that if.
No one, I'm just saying, wherever category you wanna put them in, no one was guaranteed a fixed rate. So, to this one, I don't wanna leave that open. Okay, I mean, what we're talking about is a system-wide way for everyone to be the same, and phase into that for the 500 people that are there, phase them in, not just go switch and have them pay the current rate, just have a progression into it, whatever it is. Okay, I mean,
I was under the impression that they were
that's just.
assured of 10%, 10 cents.
No, it's basically tied to the retail rate. So in terms of, if you look at in the second column, second box, someone that had a solar installation in 2011 had a net metering and got a credit of 12 cents. Today, it's 10 cents. Because that's what our,
Good.
that's what.
Okay.
Can I ask us one more question? Melissa, can you just define avoided cost for me again with that 3 cents? means?
Sure, it's the cost of generation that we are not incurring because we are accepting a kilowatt hour of solar
From any of our power plants?
from any sources, including the market, any of our power plants or the market.
So it's a blended rate, whether it's a coal, natural gas plant, or power purchase agreement?
It's the marginal piece that we would turn down. So at the time that it's done, that it's calculated, it's not a blended rate, it's just the marginal cost.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments, questions? Paul?
So to clarify, on the grandfathering, somewhat, a little confusion here in terms of the original proposal put forward was to grandfather essentially existing customers at the retail rate that would flow with whatever the retail rate is. And that new customers would adopt this 7.5 cent rate. And that we had a 60-day time frame for implementation. I think in some of the discussions, we heard that the 60-day was problematic. And we went to thinking more like and we saw the installations going on a little slower. We thought more of a 6-month basis. So approve, implement 6 months grandfather anyone that's on the system at that time into this full retail rate versus anyone after that is 7.5 cents. Then the discussion was, well, others have sort of done the phasing. Well, generally when you phase in, you phase everyone, and then you avoid the grandfather. So we have sort of this, which way do you want to cut the pie decision. And so it's a mixed bag. And that's why it's a little confusing in a way, but you almost can't have both. You can't the grandfathering and the phase-in and we'll have 500 customers, 500 rates with different time frames, et cetera. So I think it's sort of, that's where some of the confusion is. I think that we've sort of had the two 2 points here. The grandfathering in, we had set at 60 days. We think we, given the installation now, can look more towards grandfathering, but make this thing effective sort of December 31st. And so give the market 6 months' time. We get our solar installations in, the 7.5 cent becomes reality, and then we go there. The other choice is that you do this phase in, and that sort of, in our mind, takes the grandfathering off, and then everyone phases in this stepped process, so we all get to the same rate at the end of the
So the grandfathering in, they're guaranteed this 10 cents for how long?
as long as the 10 cents is in existence.
It's a retail rate.
But you're-
Retail
retail
rate,
rate.
retail rate, whatever our retail.
Okay, all right.
Which, I don't think that was clear at the last meeting, because it made it sound like it was a fixed rate.
Forever, yeah, that's kind of what I thought we were gonna follow, that was forever. Okay, good, I'm glad we cleared that up.
So we have one rate for everyone, those who have existing solar system and those coming online, will all be phased in over a period of time until they got to 7.
That would be our recommendation for the phasing out. Yes.
Speaking of confusion, I want there to be no confusion, to the members of the audience to whether or not we have received your emails. We have received your emails, we all have received your emails, we appreciate your emails, and I hope today is a response for that you might be looking for, or at least know that you have had direct input into the process. And for the board's benefit, I want you to know that the staff, the executive staff, Paul and his executives in this process, have been meeting with people about this subject for some time on various and sundry parts of it and all of it. And I think that one of the reasons we're having this workshop is so they can share with us what they have learned and what their recommendations would be based on all the facts and all the different constituents participating and contributing in the process. And I think you've done a good job across the board with that. Appreciate that. Melissa?
Okay. I can flip through the next section relatively quickly, given the depth of this discussion. And so I'll start on page 25. This is, what I'm really trying to get to with this conversation is the concept of what is capacity. And how does that factor into this discussion? We build our system to serve the absolute highest requirements of the system at any given point in time. And for our system at JEA, that happens to be on a January morning. So this is what our system load looks like for the aggregate system on a winter peak day. In fact, we peaked January 11th, 2010. In very simple terms, what we have to do is build the whole grid. We have to build generation, transmission, distribution to meet the requirement of that one single point in time plus a regulatory required reserve margin. What that translates into from an expense perspective is the cost to serve a typical residential customer. So on the bottom left-hand side of this chart, you see the cost of a 1,000 kilowatt-hour customer in a month. And all of those fixed costs, all of those grid requirements, all the capacity requirements translate into a fixed cost per month to serve customers of about $72. Variable cost to serve a customer is about $36 a month, so you end up with a customer bill of $109 a month. Where the problem develops, and I'll caveat, this is a rate problem, this is not a solar problem, but the solar discussion is drawing attention to this rate problem. Where the problem develops is on the revenue side. And if you compare the expense side to the revenue side, you've got $72 of fixed expenses each month for a typical residential customer compared to $5 of fixed revenue. And $103 of variable revenue to get to that same $109 cost to provide service. So we get to the same nut, but we get there in a very different way, in a very materially different way. It's reflective of 20th century pricing. It's reflective of consumption-based, volume-based pricing, and that pricing model has been around for over 100 years in the utility industry. And it actually was a model that worked fine for the last 100 years, up until 2008. It was a model that because utility sales consistently grew at around 3% every year, because each per customer usage was growing every single year, utilities were able to volumetrically price and financially be just fine. But again, this is not a solar problem, this is a rates problem. To quickly get to how solar works, I think we've covered most of this already. It's solar panels can self-supply a customer unless it's dark or cloudy or there's other customer needs, and then the customer's pulling from the grid. And when a solar panel produces more than a customer uses, they put energy back to the grid. The point being that solar customers are using the grid, and that's an important fact when you look at the cost structure. This chart is one that the next chart on this page is one that we used in the board meeting in February. This overlays the winter peak day with a solar production curve in the winter. And the scales are very different, so this is not meant to provide a relative size look, it's meant to provide a relative direction look. And the point being that our capacity requirement is set first thing in the morning on a winter day when the sun is not up, when it's dark. And so solar production, although an important component of our overall system capacity, doesn't help to offset our capacity needs as a utility because we're winter peak. So when you look at the expense side of the equation in terms of the cost to provide service to a typical net metered customer, you still see that $72 cost because that's all the fixed costs associated with that 7 a.m. peak. You see the fuel cost of $36. The fuel cost is essentially avoided cost, and that gets offset by the solar production from that customer to get an expense to serve that customer of $72 a month. But when you compare that with the revenue that we receive from a net metered customer, what you see is there's that $5.50 fixed component of a bill. There's a variable payment that is 100% offset because in this case it's 1,000 kilowatt hours of production from this customer's solar panels. So that we collect $5.50 on a bill from this customer against a cost to provide service to this customer of $72.36. So there is an under recovery of $66.86 from a net metered customer, and that's paid for by all our other customers.
So what many in the industry have done is recognize this and then have looked at an additional charge for rooftop solar and have said, we're going to place a fixed monthly fee, and that goes back to the original box we had the discussion on in terms of the demand charge. And we've seen demand charge just on top of the pricing here, anywhere from $16 to $38 a month for each individual residential customer. And so I just want to clarify why we put this here as an illustration. The industry has focused on that and said, well, we've got to recover that cost. Not everyone, but some have. And said, we're going to place a charge on this rooftop. So we're not doing that. We're not proposing that. I think that down the road, when we do the demand structure for all customers equally, we'll balance this out appropriately. But for now, we're not recommending that.
The next couple of pages provide a very oversimplified example of directionally why this is imposing costs. But I think in reading some of the nodding heads that we probably have already beat this concept to death a bit. So I'm going to, in the interest of time, move on unless there's somebody who'd like me to cover it. And I'll just quickly skip to what this means in terms of the dollars impact on customers. So under today's construct, typical residential bill is about $124 a month. Typical net metering customer, our median size of a net metered customer is about 6 kilowatts. So the typical customer under today's policies is paying about $17 a month. Typical customer under the proposed revision to the policy would instead pay about $33 a month. Again, as compared to $124. So there's still that $91 a month in savings versus what you would pay if you did not have solar. And that's what's used to determine the payback periods and return on investments on the solar installations themselves. And if you hold the $91 in your head for just a minute, we'll flip to the next page. The $91 a month compares to, under the existing policies, it's $107 a month. So obviously that lengthens the payback for solar that's installed within our service territory if we're reducing the monthly amount that's available for that benefit. However, what's really interesting to note on this page is if you compare the monthly decrease in bill to a 6 kilowatt solar installation in FPL service territory. The reduction in bill, and this is a result of both their rate structure and their actual absolute rates, but the reduction in monthly bill in FPL service territory is $89.75. So even though there's a longer payback period in JEA's service territory, under the new proposed policy revisions, it's still a shorter payback than it is in FPL's. And why is this a community issue? This next slide just takes a look at the demographics, both of our community as a whole and of customers that have installed solar. More than 50,000 of the families that JEA serves live below the poverty line. If you look at the median income of households that are installing solar, they're about 50% higher than the median income of Duval County. So when we talk about these transfers, whether you call them subsidies or investments or wealth transfers or however you want to label them, we're talking about money being transferred from those who are least able to afford it to those who are generally at higher income levels, which we think is an important community issue.
Could you just back up to the question on 30? I mean, what this basically screams is the whole conversation we've had about how our rate structure needs to be restructured, because I guess I didn't have an appreciation for the reduction, but today someone that has solar is paying us $700 a month, and yet there are times during the day that they are pulling from the grid, they're pulling on the transmission lines, they're pulling on all the infrastructure that we have to still make sure works for the time that they flip the switch and the solar is not there. If battery power existed today, does it change any of this?
Fundamentally.
And how does it change the conversation?
What's happening under today's price structure, it's such an excellent question, and it's such a great segue into the next portion of the conversation. But what's happening under today's rate structure is the grid is acting as a free battery. No one would ever rationally, economically install a battery coupled with solar because they're getting that service for free from the JEA grid. If you change the conversation and you change the structure of what we're doing so that there is an economic incentive there, then it's much more likely that people will install batteries, which makes it then much more likely that they use those batteries coupled with solar, or frankly even without solar, to change their own usage. And if enough people change their own usage in a way that becomes material in aggregate, we can change our capacity requirements. We can ultimately change our cost structure. We can make this thing more affordable for everybody. But we're never going to get people to behave economically rationally if we keep offering battery service for free.
Got it. The battery technology is not there now, or it's there, it's too expensive to install.
It's really the price.
It's a lot closer than it was. Battery, the cost of installed storage has come down about 50% in the last 4 years. And you see things, the economic models will tell you it still has room to go to be economically feasible. That said, when Tesla offered its Powerwall, which is a pretty slick looking little battery pack, they were sold out of their Powerwall before they started producing it. So there's demand there for residential storage. I highly doubt we would see uptake of storage in our service territory if we didn't have the price signals for it.
Well, I don't want to go on too much, but how does that change the fixed cost? Because you still have to have that grid in place.
You have the grid, but you don't have the generating capacity.
Okay, because that capacity that's stored in that battery can be used.
That's right.
They're generating power when I'm not home. When I get home, I need it, but I'm not generating power.
So
Right.
we completely depreciated a power bill.
So,
And we go back to rebuild. We may build half of the capacity that was there before.
okay, so you don't see that.
Because the debt and everything.
And where that storage exists, we'd like to get the pricing structure so we're agnostic. It can be connected with a solar panel, it can be a residential business without solar, it can be utility scale batteries, but that will drive that efficiency or that load factor, which is 47% now, upwards of a sort of 70-75%. And we save hundreds of millions.
I'm getting off. Thank you, Chairman.
Let me skip ahead to the national debate section. This really is a national conversation. We're having a conversation about something that utilities all over the country are having conversations about. There's a snapshot on page 35 about how utilities are approaching this question. So, and you'll see bookends of solutions from the net metering question. By far the most common solution utilities are going to is raising fixed charges. You'll see that 61 utilities in 30 states proposed raising fixed charges in the last year or so. There's all sorts of cost studies that are out there that evaluate the value of solar. There's no commonly accepted market way of evaluating the value of solar, but lots of different ways to slice it. And you'll see a whole host of other policy changes around this. What I'll point out is this is not an investor-owned utility question. This is a question that's grappled with by both investor-owned utilities and municipal utilities, but perhaps for somewhat different reasons. If you're sitting in an investor-owned utility, your incentives are to maximize your shareholder returns. So when you talk about changing net metering policies, and you talk about changing fixed charges, what you're really looking to do is maximize the amount of revenue you're getting under a regulatory approved rate structure. For a municipal utility, the motivation is fundamentally different. We're here to protect our customers. We're here to represent our community. So when we have these conversations, we're looking for a way to fairly and transparently treat all of our customers, whether they have the means to participate in some of these programs or not. And ultimately, we're looking for a way to provide the lowest cost, most reliable service to our customers in the future, even if that means a smaller utility. And that's just a fundamental difference between us and the investor-owned utilities in terms of grappling with these questions. Again, Southeast Market treats these attributes differently. We don't have a renewable portfolio standard. We don't have an organized market to value some of the things that stakeholders will talk about in terms of the value of solar, like transmission credits or capacity congestion credits, and so it is fundamentally different. One thing I'll point out on this page is that FPL is about 10 times the size of JEA. They're by far Florida's largest utility. They've publicly committed to less than 5 times JEA's commitment to solar. So we're pretty serious about this being part of our mix. And that's in spite of their parent company, NextEra, being by far the largest provider of solar in the country. They put over 1 gigawatt of installed solar capacity.